A virgin rancher took shelter with two Apache sisters. That night changed his life. Forever Caleb had always known the land like the back of his hand. The rolling hills of the western plains, the dry heat that could turn a man's sweat into dust, and the endless stretch of land that seemed to go on forever. These were his world. As a young rancher, Caleb had spent most of his life working the land, living by the rhythm of the seasons and the unspoken rules of the rugged wilderness. He was strong, hardworking, and independent. But there were some things the land couldn't prepare him for, like the storm that would change his life forever. It started like any other evening. Caleb had spent the day tending to his cattle, fixing broken fences, and making sure everything on the ranch was in order. The sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the plains, and Caleb knew it was time to head back to the ranch house. He mounted his horse, a sturdy animal named Rusty, and turned towards home. But as the first few drops of rain hit his face, he realized the weather was turning. At first, it was just a light drizzle, barely enough to make a difference. Caleb had seen storms roll in quickly, especially this time of year, but he wasn't worried. He'd been caught in worse before, but soon the drizzle turned into a downpour. The rain came in sheets, soaking him to the bone. The wind picked up, howling through the plains, pushing Rusty off course. The air grew thick with moisture, and the storm seemed to have a mind of its own. Caleb knew the safest option was to find shelter before it got worse. He looked around, but there was nothing but the endless horizon. The ranch was too far to make it back in time, and he couldn't risk riding through the storm. His eyes searched the land, trying to find a safe place to wait it out. And then, through the rain and the mist, he saw something. A small cabin, tucked away at the base of a hill. Caleb wasn't sure if it was real or just a mirage, but it was his only chance. With Rusty's hooves thundering on the muddy ground, Caleb urged the horse forward, the storm now beating down on them in full force. It was a difficult ride, and the closer he got to the cabin, the more he realized it wasn't just an illusion. There was light coming from inside, flickering like a beacon in the darkness. Caleb guided Rusty up the hill, and with a final push, they reached the cabin. He dismounted quickly, grateful to be out of the storm. Caleb's clothes were soaked, his boots heavy with mud, but he didn't care. The cabin was small, made of rough-hewn logs, with smoke curling from the chimney. The door was slightly ajar, and Caleb hesitated for only a moment before knocking. There was no answer, but he didn't have time to wait. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The warmth hit him immediately, and the smell of wood smoke and something savory filled the air. Inside, the cabin was humble but cozy. There was a fire crackling in the hearth, and two women sat near the flames. They looked up as he entered, their expressions unreadable. The older of the two women stood first. She was tall, with long, dark hair pulled back in a simple braid. Her face was strong, with high cheekbones and sharp, dark eyes that seemed to pierce right through him. She had the look of someone who had seen much in her life, someone who was used to facing challenges head-on. Her name was Naya. The younger woman sitting beside her was a striking contrast. She was shorter with a softer look to her face, but her eyes, though warm, held a certain depth to them. Her name was Tala. She was the type of person who smiled easily, her laughter coming quickly, as if she knew how to find joy even in difficult times. But there was something about the way she held herself that suggested she too carried her own burdens. "Sorry to barge in like this," Caleb began, his voice rough from the cold and the wind. "The storm is fierce, and I didn't know where else to go. Can I stay here until it passes?" Naya regarded him for a moment, her gaze never wavering. She seemed to be measuring him, deciding whether or not to trust this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere. Caleb stood silently, waiting for her response, his mind racing with thoughts of his ranch and the work he had left behind. Finally, Naya nodded, her expression softening just slightly. "You're welcome to stay," she said, her voice low and steady. but we don't take kindly to guests who can't respect our ways." Caleb nodded eagerly, not wanting to say anything that might offend. He was simply grateful to be out of the storm. "Thank you," he said, stepping further into the cabin. The warmth was a relief, and he could feel the tension in his muscles begin to loosen. He took off his soaked jacket, hanging it by the fire to dry. The two women didn't speak as he did this, and Caleb felt their eyes on him, as though they were observing him in a way he wasn't used to. He wondered if they were worried about having a stranger in their home. Tala broke the silence, her voice light and easy. "What brings a rancher like you out here on a night like this?" she asked, her eyes twinkling with curiosity. "Not many people pass through these parts, especially not in such weather." Caleb hesitated, unsure of how to explain. "I was just out checking on the cattle. The storm caught me off guard." "And you thought you'd ride out into it?" Naya asked sharply, her tone more skeptical than her sister's. Caleb lowered his gaze, feeling a twinge of embarrassment. "I didn't think it would get this bad." Naya's expression softened ever so slightly, and she gestured to the fire. "Sit. We'll get you something warm to eat." Grateful for her offer, Caleb sat down on the log bench near the hearth, careful not to drip any water onto the wooden floor. Tala got up and moved towards the small kitchen area, where she quickly began preparing a pot of stew. The scent of it made Caleb's stomach growl, reminding him just how long it had been since he'd had a proper meal. As the stew simmered, the three of them sat in companionable silence. Caleb watched the two women as they worked together. They had a quiet grace about them, as though they had lived their lives on their own terms and knew exactly what they were doing. There was something comforting about their presence, yet mysterious at the same time. Caleb couldn't help but wonder about their story. Why were they so far from the nearest town? What brought them here, to this remote place in the middle of nowhere? After a while, the stew was ready, and Tala brought over bowls for each of them. The warmth of the food matched the warmth of the fire, and Caleb couldn't remember the last time he had felt so comfortable. They ate in silence, the storm still raging outside. Caleb found himself more and more at ease, but there was something about the night that felt unusual, something he couldn't quite place. As the last of the food disappeared, Naya stood up. "You'll need to rest. There's no telling when the storm will pass." Caleb nodded, his exhaustion catching up with him. He had been on the road for hours, and now, with the warmth of the cabin surrounding him, the fatigue hit him all at once. "Thank you again," he said quietly, his voice filled with gratitude. "You're welcome," Naya replied simply. "But remember, not all help comes without a price." The words hung in the air, but Caleb wasn't sure what she meant. He glanced at the two women, whose faces were unreadable. He had no idea how the night would unfold, but one thing was clear. His life had already changed the moment he walked through the door. The storm raged outside, but the warmth of the fire inside the cabin made Caleb feel more at peace than he had in days. He sat by the hearth, the glow from the flames casting soft shadows on the walls. Naya and Tala were quiet too, each lost in their own thoughts as the night stretched on. Caleb could feel the tension in the air, not unpleasant, but charged with something unspoken. It was as if the storm outside had somehow brought a deeper sense of connection between them all, even though they were still strangers. After the meal, Naya stood up to stoke the fire. Her movements were graceful, purposeful, and Caleb couldn't help but admire the strength she carried with her. She wasn't just physically strong. There was a kind of quiet power in her demeanor that made him respect her without her needing to say a word. Tala, on the other hand, was more open, her smile easy and her eyes bright with curiosity. She leaned forward as if eager to ask Caleb something, but she held back, sensing the unspoken boundaries of the evening. Finally, it was Tala who broke the silence. "So Caleb," she said, her voice light and friendly, "you're a rancher, right? What's it like, living on a ranch all alone?" Caleb shifted in his seat, uncomfortable with the question at first. He wasn't used to talking about his life in such a personal way. The ranch had always been his responsibility. He worked hard, took care of the animals, and made sure everything ran smoothly. He never really thought about it beyond that. "It's peaceful," he said after a moment, choosing his words carefully. "The work's hard, but I like it that way. There's something about the land, you know. It feels like it's part of me." Tala nodded, as if she understood exactly what he meant. "I get that," she said softly. "I've always thought that about the land, too. It's where we come from, where we belong." She paused for a moment as though considering something. "But it must be lonely, don't you think? Living all alone out there day after day." Caleb hadn't expected her to ask about loneliness, and for a moment he didn't know how to respond. It was a question he hadn't really considered. He had always been too focused on the work, the daily tasks that needed to be done, to think about how it might feel to be alone. "I suppose it can be," he said, feeling the weight of her question, "but I've never really thought much about it. I've always had the ranch, the animals, the land to keep me busy." Naya, who had been standing near the fire, turned to look at him then. Her gaze was steady, but there was something in her eyes that Caleb couldn't quite place. "You know," she said quietly, "sometimes people don't realize how much they need others until they're in a situation where they're forced to face it." Her words were calm, but there was a depth to them that made Caleb pause. She wasn't just talking about the storm or about him. She was speaking about something deeper, something that touched on his own life. Caleb felt a knot form in his stomach. He wasn't sure what Naya meant by her words, but there was an unsettling feeling in them. It made him think of all the times he'd avoided relationships, the times he'd chosen the solitude of his ranch over the company of others. Maybe she was right. Maybe there was more to life than just work. Tala's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Naya's right, though," she said with a smile that was both warm and a little teasing. "I mean, how could you not want some company? A person needs to have someone to talk to share their day with. It gets old just talking to cows and horses." Caleb chuckled, though it felt a little forced. "I never thought I'd be talking about my cows and horses to anyone other than myself," he said, trying to lighten the mood. "But I suppose you have a point. Maybe I don't know what it's like to have someone around." Tala's eyes lit up as she leaned closer. "It's not just about talking," she said, her tone shifting slightly. "It's about connection. Having someone who understands you, who sees you for who you really are. That's something the land can't give you." Caleb felt a surge of curiosity mixed with something else, something he couldn't quite name. What was it about these two women that made him feel so drawn to them? They were different from anyone he had met before, and the more they spoke, the more he realized that they saw the world in ways he had never considered. There was a soft silence between them, and Caleb wondered if they were waiting for him to say something more, to open up in a way he never had before, but he didn't know how. He was used to keeping things inside, to guarding his thoughts and feelings like they were treasures meant only for himself. And yet, here, in this small cabin with two women he barely knew, it felt like the right moment to say something. To share a piece of himself he had never let anyone see. "I don't know how to do that," he said, his voice quieter now. "I don't know how to let people in." Naya studied him carefully, her expression unreadable. After a long pause, she spoke again, her voice low but firm. "You don't have to know how," she said. "You just have to be willing to try." Tala nodded in agreement. "It's not about getting it perfect. It's about taking the first step, and maybe that's all you need to begin." Caleb looked at the fire for a long moment, the flames dancing and crackling in the hearth. He didn't say anything in response, but inside he could feel something stirring. He wasn't sure what it was, but it was there, like a soft whisper in the back of his mind. A call to change, to open up, to allow someone else into his life. He wasn't sure if he was ready for it, but for the first time in a long while, he wasn't as afraid of the idea. As the hours passed and the storm slowly started to die down, the three of them settled into a quiet rhythm. Caleb helped them clean up, and though the conversation never grew too heavy, It felt more natural, more comfortable, as if the three of them had known each other for years. The distance that had initially existed between them had started to fade, replaced by a sense of mutual respect and understanding. The bond was slow, but it was growing, something deeper than just shelter from a storm, something neither of them could have predicted when Caleb had first knocked on the door. Later, as the night grew quieter and the storm finally began to taper off, Naya stood up from her seat near the fire. She stretched her arms and yawned, a movement that made Caleb realize just how much time had passed. "The storm has stopped," she said, almost to herself. "We should get some rest. Tomorrow is a new day." Tala stood as well, her smile still in place. "We'll need to figure out where you're headed next, Caleb," she said, her voice warm. "But for tonight, you're safe. We'll take care of you." Caleb nodded, feeling a strange sense of relief. He had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but for now, he had a sense of belonging in a place he never expected. He couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just begun to change in ways he couldn't yet understand, and that whatever came next, it would be different from anything he had ever known. As the fire flickered low and the storm finally passed, Caleb lay awake on the small cot that had been set up for him. The wind had died down, and the air outside had that crisp, fresh feeling that came after a storm. It was peaceful, but his mind refused to settle. Thoughts raced through his head, spinning faster than he could catch them. The night had been so strange, so different from anything he had experienced before. He wasn't just thinking about the storm or the long ride. It was something deeper, something about the two women who had taken him in, the bond they had started to form, and how, for the first time in a long time, he wasn't alone. He turned over trying to get comfortable, but sleep was elusive. The fire had burned down to embers, casting shadows on the walls of the cabin, and outside, the night was still and silent. Caleb couldn't help but think about the conversations they had shared, the way Naya had spoken with such authority, and the way Tala had laughed, her voice light and inviting. He wondered how two women from such a different world had found their way out here in the middle of nowhere. The more he thought about it, the more questions he had, but something told him that now wasn't the time to ask. He needed to wait. He needed to understand things at his own pace, just as they were doing. Minutes turned into hours, and just as Caleb felt his eyelids grow heavy, he heard movement from the other side of the cabin. A soft rustle of fabric and a quiet step across the wooden floor. He turned toward the sound, his heart pounding a little faster than usual. He hadn't expected anyone to be awake at this hour. When he looked toward the fire, he saw Tala standing there, her silhouette framed by the dim glow. She was looking out the window, her back to him. Caleb cleared his throat, unsure if he should say anything. "Can't sleep either?" he asked, his voice hoarse from the dry air. Tala turned slowly, her eyes meeting his in the dim light. "I guess not," she said with a small smile. She moved toward the fire, stoking it slightly to bring the flames back to life. "I don't know, something about tonight feels different. You know what I mean?" Caleb nodded, not sure what to say. He didn't know what she meant exactly, but he understood that feeling. "Yeah," he muttered, "it's hard to explain." Tala looked at him, her gaze steady. "You don't have to explain," she said. "Sometimes you just feel things without needing to put them into words." Caleb swallowed, his throat dry. "I'm not used to feeling much," he admitted. "I mean, I've always kept to myself. The ranch, it's all I've known." Tala smiled softly, sitting down near the fire. "I think you're feeling now because you're letting yourself. You've been alone for so long, it's hard to remember how it feels to really connect with others." She paused for a moment before adding, "But that doesn't mean it's too late." Her words lingered in the air like a quiet promise, and Caleb felt a warmth spread through him. He wasn't sure how to respond, but part of him felt like he was finally hearing the truth, even though it was something he hadn't wanted to acknowledge until now. He had built walls around himself, and the land had always been his refuge. But in this small cabin, With these two women who were so different from anyone he had known, those walls began to crumble. As Tala added a few more logs to the fire, the flames grew brighter, casting dancing shadows across the room. For a long time they sat in comfortable silence, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Caleb had no idea how long it had been, but at some point he turned to Tala and asked the question that had been swirling in his mind since he arrived. "So, what brings you and Naya out here?" he asked softly. "Why are you so far from town?" Tala's smile faded a little as she leaned back against the wall. She seemed to consider the question for a moment before answering, her voice quieter now. "It's a long story," she said. "But the short version is, we chose this life. We wanted to be away from the rest of the world. There are too many expectations out there. Too many people telling us what we should do, what we should believe. This is our choice. It's the only way we've ever felt free." Caleb sat up, intrigued. He didn't know what it felt like to live without obligations, to live in a way that didn't revolve around work and survival. "I don't understand," he admitted. "The world's a tough place, but we don't always have the luxury of choosing how we live, do we?" Tala's eyes softened as she looked at him. "You're right. Life isn't easy. It wasn't easy for us either. But sometimes you have to make hard choices. You have to go against what everyone expects of you." She paused. "And sometimes that means being alone. It's not always the life we wanted, but it's the one we have." Caleb felt a lump in his throat. There was something so raw, so honest in her words. He had always been surrounded by people, by family, by the land. But he had never stopped to consider how those around him might feel about the choices they had made, the things they had sacrificed. Tala and Naya, in their quiet way, had chosen something that Caleb had never even thought possible. They had chosen freedom, even at the cost of being alone. He didn't know what to say in response. He just nodded slowly, as if trying to process the weight of her words. He had lived his life with certainty. He knew what was expected of him, and he knew the rules he had to follow. But Tala's words made him question everything he thought he knew. He wondered if his life could be different if he could choose something else, something he hadn't imagined. Suddenly, he felt a presence beside him. It was Naya. She had been standing quietly by the doorway, watching them for a while. Caleb hadn't noticed her approach, but when she spoke, her voice was calm, steady. "Sometimes the hardest part is not knowing what's next," she said softly. "It's easy to get lost in the comfort of what we know, even if that comfort is painful." Caleb turned to her, surprised by the depth in her words. "And what if I don't know how to move forward?" he asked, the vulnerability in his voice startling him. "What if I'm too scared to leave everything I've ever known behind?" Naya looked at him for a long time, as though she were searching for something inside him. Finally, she spoke, her voice gentle but firm. "You can't move forward if you're always looking back," she said. "You have to take the first step, even if it's small. Even if it's just a tiny step, it's still a step, and that's enough." Caleb didn't respond right away. Her words sank deep into him, and he realized that for the first time in his life, he was unsure of what came next. But he also realized that maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. Maybe it was okay to not have all the answers, to not know exactly where he was going. The unknown, though frightening, had its own kind of freedom. As the fire burned low and the quiet of the cabin settled in, Caleb felt something shift inside him. He wasn't the same man who had walked in off the stormy plains hours ago. There was a part of him, a part that had always been afraid to let go of control, that was beginning to trust something new, trusting the journey, trusting the connection, trusting the women who had welcomed him into their home. Naya and Tala sat with him in the quiet darkness, no words needed. The night was a turning point, and Caleb could feel it. He wasn't sure where the road ahead would lead, but for the first time in a long while, he was ready to take that first step. The days that followed Caleb's unexpected shelter in the cabin were marked by an uneasy sense of change. The storm had passed, But something else lingered in the air, something that made everything feel different. Caleb woke up every morning to the sound of birds singing and the sun casting long shadows over the land. He had gotten used to waking up alone on his ranch, the only sounds being the distant calls of animals and the rustling of wind through the trees. But here, in this small cabin tucked away in the mountains, it was different. There was a quiet warmth in the air, a comfort that Caleb had never felt before. For the next few days, Caleb found himself helping Nea and Tala with their daily tasks, though they never really asked for it. They worked in silent harmony, each of them knowing exactly what needed to be done. Nea tended to the firewood, the garden, and the livestock, while Tala seemed to move effortlessly between cooking, cleaning, and making sure the cabin was in order. Caleb, despite feeling a bit out of place at first, slowly started to pick up the rhythm of their lives. He worked alongside them, not out of obligation, but because he felt a strange pull to be useful, to somehow contribute to the peace he had found here. But it wasn't just the work that had changed. It was him. Caleb had always been the kind of man who kept to himself, who worked hard but never really questioned what he was doing or why. The ranch had been everything to him, but now something had shifted. There was a sense of purpose in his days that he had never experienced before. It was as though the land, the people around him, and even the very air he breathed had opened his eyes to a new way of living. As the days passed, Caleb began to realize how little he truly knew about himself. Nea and Tala had opened his eyes to things he had never thought about: the importance of human connection, the value of shared experiences, and the idea that life was about more than just surviving. It was about living fully, embracing the unknown, and learning from others. He had spent so much time focused on the ranch and its demands that he had never stopped to ask what he truly wanted or needed. He had always believed that he was doing everything for his family, for the legacy of the ranch. But now, he wasn't so sure. He began to question whether that was enough. Was living alone, working endlessly, really the life he wanted? Or had he been running from something deeper, something that had been buried inside him for years? One afternoon, as Caleb was helping Nea gather firewood, he found himself lost in thought. The sound of his boots crunching against the dry leaves underfoot was comforting, but his mind was far away. He had been thinking a lot about what Nea had said to him that night, the idea of taking the first step, even if it was small. He had realized that he had spent his entire life following the path that others had set for him, but now, for the first time, he was wondering if that path was really the one he was meant to walk. "Something on your mind, Caleb," Nea's voice broke through his thoughts. She had stopped walking and was looking at him with a curious expression. Caleb hesitated before responding. "I don't know," he said, his voice trailing off. "I've been thinking a lot about life. About my life, I mean. I've always thought I knew what I was doing, but now I'm not so sure." Nea didn't say anything at first. She simply studied him, her gaze thoughtful. After a long pause, she spoke. "It's never too late to question things," she said quietly. "You've spent so much time looking out for everyone else, but what about you? What do you want?" The question hung in the air between them, and Caleb felt a tightness in his chest. He hadn't really asked himself that question in years. What did he want? He had always known what was expected of him: work the ranch, take care of the animals, be there for his family. But what did he want for himself? He wasn't sure anymore. "I don't know," he said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "I don't know what I'm supposed to want. I've never thought about it like that." Nea gave him a small, knowing smile. "Sometimes, the hardest thing is realizing that you don't have all the answers," she said. "But that doesn't mean you're lost. It just means you're at a crossroads, and at a crossroads you can choose which way to go." Caleb thought about her words as they walked back to the cabin. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was beautiful, but Caleb didn't see the beauty in it the way he used to. Now he saw it with new eyes. He wasn't just seeing the landscape, he was feeling it, understanding it. He was a part of it, and that realization was both humbling and empowering. Later that evening, as they sat around the fire, Caleb found himself looking at Tala and Nea in a new light. They had shown him something he had never experienced before, the freedom to be himself, to question everything, to embrace the unknown without fear. He had spent his life afraid of change, afraid of stepping out of his comfort zone. But now, sitting in this small cabin with these two women who had chosen a different path, he realized that maybe it was time for him to make a choice too. The next morning, after a peaceful night's sleep, Caleb woke up before the sun had risen. He stepped outside, the cool air of dawn filling his lungs. He could see the mist rising from the land, the quiet beauty of the world waking up around him. He took a deep breath and realized that, for the first time in years, he wasn't rushing to do something. He wasn't thinking about work or chores or anything he had to do. He was simply being, simply existing in this moment. He had always thought that his purpose was tied to the ranch, to the land that his family had worked for generations. But now, he wasn't so sure. What if there was more to life than what he had always known? What if he could make his own choices, follow his own path, and create a life that was truly his? As the sun rose higher, casting its golden light over the land, Caleb made a decision. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't go back to the life he had before. He had to take the next step, no matter how small it might be. He had to follow his heart, even if it meant leaving behind everything he had ever known. When Nea and Tala came outside to join him, Caleb turned to them with a quiet determination. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice steady, "and I've realized something. I've spent my life following a path that wasn't mine. It's time for me to make my own choices. To live my own life." Nea's expression softened as she listened to him. "It's not easy, Caleb, but it's worth it, and I'm proud of you for taking that step." Tala smiled, her eyes shining with approval. "You've already taken the first step, Caleb. Now it's up to you to keep going." As they stood there, the three of them together, Caleb felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He wasn't sure what the future would bring, but he knew that, whatever happened, he was ready to face it. For the first time in a long time, he felt free. The morning after Caleb's decision was calm and serene. The sun had risen higher in the sky, casting soft rays of light through the trees surrounding the cabin. Caleb stood outside, looking out at the vast, open land that stretched before him. He had always been familiar with this view, but now, for the first time, it felt different. The land, once a symbol of duty and obligation, now seemed to hold endless possibilities. The world felt wide open, as though the very ground beneath his feet was ready to help him take his next step. The night before, as they had sat around the fire, Caleb had finally told Nea and Tala about his decision to change his life. He had spoken with an honesty he had never known before. He realized that he had spent years trapped in a routine, following a path that wasn't truly his. But now, the thought of breaking free, of creating a life that was his own, filled him with a sense of excitement he hadn't expected. For the first time, Caleb was no longer afraid of what the future might hold. He didn't know exactly where he was going or what choices he would need to make, but he understood something fundamental. It was up to him. It was his life to shape, and he no longer had to let the past dictate his future. Nea had listened to him quietly, her expression thoughtful. Tala had smiled, her eyes filled with encouragement. "Whatever you choose," Nea had said, "it will be your choice, and that's what matters." And Tala had added, "It's about what makes you feel alive, Caleb. Whatever path you walk, make sure it's one that brings you peace." Those words had stayed with him, echoing in his mind as he stood outside now, the cool morning air brushing against his face. He didn't feel lost anymore. He felt like someone who was finally starting to understand what it meant to live for himself, to make decisions that aligned with his true desires rather than the expectations of others. But there was still the question of what came next. As much as he had decided to change, he knew it wouldn't be easy. There was always the weight of responsibility, the expectations that came from family, from the world around him. His family's ranch had been passed down for generations, and the thought of leaving it behind wasn't something Caleb took lightly. He knew it wasn't just about the land. It was about his place in that world, his role in the legacy of his family. He wasn't sure how they would take it, how they would react if he chose a different life, one that didn't follow the path they had laid out for him. For years, Caleb had kept his feelings buried deep, afraid to disappoint his family. But now he knew that he couldn't keep living a life that wasn't truly his. He couldn't keep pretending that he was content with the life he had built, a life that felt more like a cage than a freedom. He had to make the choice, whether to stay and continue living according to others' expectations, or to take the risk and carve out a future that was all his own. Later that day, Caleb sat down with Nea and Tala. The three of them gathered around the table in the small cabin. The sun had risen higher, casting a golden glow on the room. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a silent recognition that this moment was significant. They knew that the choices Caleb made from here on out would change everything. "I've been thinking," Caleb began, his voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity. "About what you said, Nea, about making my own choice. I know I have to make a decision about my future, but I don't know how to start. I don't know what it means to choose something for myself. I've always just followed the path that was laid out for me." Nea looked at him thoughtfully, her dark eyes calm. "It's a hard thing, Caleb," she said softly, "to make a choice when you've been so used to following what others expect of you, but you've already taken the first step. You're asking the right questions. That's how change begins." Tala leaned forward, her smile warm. "It's like building a new home," she said, her voice light. "You don't always know how it's going to turn out, but you lay down the foundation, piece by piece, and eventually you look up and realize that you've built something that's all your own." Caleb nodded slowly, feeling a mixture of uncertainty and hope. He wasn't sure how to start, but he knew he couldn't stay in the same place. "I want to change," he said. "I want to build something new, but I don't know if I'm strong enough to do it alone." "You don't have to be alone," Nea said gently. "That's the thing about life. Sometimes you have to let others help you, and sometimes others need you to help them. There's strength in knowing that we don't have to do everything by ourselves." Caleb took a deep breath. The weight of his decision still hung heavily on his shoulders, but now it felt different. The burden wasn't so overwhelming anymore. He didn't have to figure everything out in one moment. He could take his time. He could make mistakes and learn as he went. But most importantly, he could live a life that was true to who he was, not who others expected him to be. "I think," Caleb said, his voice more certain now, "I need to go home. I need to talk to my family. I don't know what they'll say, but I can't keep running from this. I have to face it, even if it's hard." Nea and Tala both nodded, understanding the gravity of his decision. They knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they also knew that Caleb was ready for whatever came next. He had already taken the hardest step. He had made the decision to change. Now the rest would follow. As Caleb stood up, a sense of calm washed over him. He wasn't sure how the conversation with his family would go, but he knew he couldn't let fear hold him back any longer. He had the power to shape his own future, and that was worth fighting for. Nea and Tala stood with him, offering their silent support. "We'll be here, Caleb," Tala said quietly. "No matter what you decide, we'll be here for you." Caleb looked at them, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He didn't have all the answers, but for the first time, he knew he didn't need to. He had found something more important than answers. He had found the courage to take the next step, and that was enough. As he turned to leave, heading back toward the ranch, the weight on his shoulders felt lighter than it had in years. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was his road to walk. And no matter what came next, he knew he wasn't walking it alone. The journey had only just begun, but for the first time, Caleb was ready to face it with open eyes, an open heart, and a newfound strength he had never known before.